Hello. So, if you haven't already watched it, I made an introduction video before this one last night, talking about what I'm going to do on this channel. Basically, I'm just going to read through old RPGs and try to understand them, because, High Gygaxian, it's not very easy to understand sometimes. And these are the kind of videos that I like to watch, where people go through the book and explain how they house ruled this, or what their interpretation of this is, or what they like and don't like. And so I was like, well, I could do that. And Chainmail seems like kind of unmarked territory. Pun sort of intended. People always talk about Chainmail in reference to D&D, but very few people actually seem like they've sat down and read it. I have actually read a lot of Chainmail, so I know that's a system I like. So we're just going to go through and read it together. And yeah, that's the idea for this video, or series of videos. I don't know how many videos it's going to take, because I'm just reading out loud, and it's probably going to be multiple hours long. But yeah, we'll just start from the top. So, Chainmail, Rules for Medieval Miniatures by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin, 2nd edition. It's a copy that I have by Gaidan Games. Wargaming with Miniatures, WM 101-200. I kind of like this art, but he looks pretty lifeless. Which I guess, for a miniatures game, it actually kind of captures that weird, uncanny valley between a person and a miniature. So I kind of like this art. With thanks to all the fantasy and medieval enthusiasts who offered so many helpful suggestions, especially Len Lakofka, Ken Bourne, Stu Tremblay, and Ernie the Barbarian. Table of contents. These probably didn't look any better before the scan than they do in the scan. But yeah, they have a sand table, which they go over later. I think this might actually be diorama, because you have like a lake here. You can barely make out the miniatures. They're like, if it wasn't for the shadows, you couldn't even make them out at all. Introduction. Games based on warfare have interested men for centuries, as such games as checkers and chess prove. The latter games are nothing less than the warfare of the period in which they were developed, abstracted and stylized for play on a board. Chess is so abstracted that it is barely recognizable as a wargame. At the other end of the spectrum, and of much more modern invention, are military miniatures. By use of figures, scaled down to an inch or two in size, the players more realistically simulate warfare and are not tied to a stylized board. Miniature warfare allows the combats to have a never-ending variety of battles over varying terrain, even refighting historic actions involving tremendous armies. Just a side note here, when I was a kid, I never had anything as complex as, real rules, but I really did love Army Men, which is probably why this jumps out to me as such a cool system. But I'll get to that as we go. In order to play a wargame, it is necessary to have rules, miniature figures and accompanying equipment, a playing area, and terrain to place upon it. There can be no doubt that you have fulfilled the first requirement, for you have purchased this set of rules. True. Your troops can be any scale that you desire. The playing area that the battles are fought out upon should be a table rather than a floor. It can be from a minimum of 4 feet to a maximum of 7 feet wide, and it should be at least 8 feet in length. 7 feet wide, that's a pretty big board. Big table. If you think about a normal room, it's about 8 feet tall. It's like the size of an entire wall of a normal bedroom. That's pretty big. These sizes will assure ample room for maneuver. There are several methods of depicting the terrain features generally used for wargames, such as hills, woods, rivers, roads, etc. First, you can utilize odds and ends to simulate terrain, or buy commercial materials from your hobby supplier, and lay them out on a flat surface to form the battlefield. Scraps of wood with the edges and corners smoothed are pyramided to form hills of varying sizes and elevations. Twigs, pieces of green sponge of lichen, stuck on and set in clay bases. Clay bases serve as miniature trees. Rivers are drawn with blue chalk or made with strips of blue plastic or felt. Roads are represented in much the same way as rivers, only brown is used. With a little imagination, almost any kind of terrain can be constructed in like manner. I like how it gives real, practical information about how to actually make a wargaming setup. Here's the table you'll need. Here's some ideas for how you make trees, or mountains, or rivers. I kind of like that. It's pretty cool. I mean, this is far before, and in my opinion, a little bit superior to, tiles or like grid-based movement like we have nowadays. Or even hex-based movement. I like this because it reminds me of an RTS, like the first real-time strategy before there was real-time strategy, Because in a real-time strategy game, I'm not talking about like Civilization or like a turn-based. I mean like a real-time strategy game. There's not individual tiles. You have the entire map of pixels to set up your units on, and that's how it works in this game too. Is you don't have to move to specific hexes, and then it's not so simplistic that this hex is obviously dangerous, but this hex is not dangerous. It's like, well, you could be anywhere between those two hexes, as a simplistic example. So I really like that. And also because it doesn't have hexes, you can use, as it talks about, you can use scraps of wood for mountains and twigs for trees. So you actually have more freedom, and it's less expensive, and it's more complex, and it feels more real than if you had a hex board or a grid board or something like that. A more advanced method is to construct terrain on 2x2 pieces of masonite or similar material, sculpting hills, gullies, bridges, rivers, and so on with plaster and or paper mache. I think I looked this up. Masonite is like a compound wood, I think, or maybe it's something else I looked up here, but it's like a pressed, mixed, like processed wood. So you get like a big, pretty flat piece of wood, and you build on top of it. And the idea they have is that you make ones for different terrain, and then you lay them next to each other to create like a whole area. So you have reusable squares, which, after you make like 6 of those, enough to fill out a table, where are you going to put all the rest of them? That's my complaint with this. It's like, okay, you made like paper mache environments. That really is an endless abyss that you're going down, where it's like, well, I want this environment now. Now I want this environment. Now I want this environment. You're going to end up with so many of these paper mache squares. Like, I don't know where you're going to put them. I guess if you have like IKEA shelves, you put like one on each shelf. But how many shelves are you getting? Like, even if you had really thin shelves, like not very tall, so the square would fit perfectly inside and with no extra room above it for the next shelf. Like, how many shelves can you get? Like 10 at most, and you'd never get that with normal shelves for anything like video games or. And I have no idea what kind of shelves they had back then. Maybe because people didn't have video games, so you don't have video game shelves. Well, I guess there's books, but it's not really deep enough. I don't know. Trees and houses are set in the modeling compound, and permanent sections of wargaming terrain are thus made. When a game is to be played, the terrain blocks are simply laid out to form the kind of battlefield desired. See, this is what I'm talking about, where you have all these different squares, and then you lay them out to create the environment. And the other problem with this idea is that the edges aren't going to really match. Like, let's say you have one that's a square, one square that's like a mountain, another square that's like a plane. Well, you're gonna have one edge end with a mountain and the other edge end flat, and then they're gonna kind of like, one edge is gonna be like a mountain like this, and the other is flat. So it's gonna like, I don't know. I don't really like the idea I like the sand table idea, which he gets to next. Finally, the most complicated form of wargaming table is the sand table. A sand table is really nothing more than a flat table with a raised edge to allow the top to be covered with a few inches of sand. Makes sense. Of course, all that sand will weigh very much when wetted down to form terrain features, so the table must be a very sturdy construction and rest on the basement or garage floor. Get a drink. Sand table's greatest advantage is that it allows full range of the player's desires for differing landscape, and it provides the most realistic looking battlefield for miniature warfare. If you're already going to have a table that's 7 feet by 8 feet, I say you might as well just spend the extra money and get a strong table and get some sand. Sand can't be expensive. Like, go to Home Depot and get some sand and just make a sand table. Because then you won't run into any of those issues with the pieces of masonite or whatever. And I think it would really cut down on how much storage space you need. Because you need the table and the miniatures and this booklet. That's kind of it. So I really like the sand table idea better. And plus, if you're just going to use a sand table, you don't even need a table. If you have like a sandbox outside, anything. You could even use like a dirt in your yard if you really wanted to. But of course, having a table, you don't have to worry about the elements. You can leave it sitting for months at a time. So inside is definitely better. The forces to be pitted against each other can be drawn from its historical account, chosen by point value assigned by a third neutral party, or worked out from a campaign situation where larger armies are moved on a map until hostile forces come into contact. Now, I think this is pretty historically significant because this is probably the first where the term campaign came from, which is now present in all RPGs, is it came from this book, from right here, Chainmail. It even kind of draws attention to it with quotes, almost like he knew, which is kind of funny. Or worked out from a campaign situation where larger armies are moved on a map until hostile forces come into contact. So basically, this is like a hex crawl in D&D nowadays. I don't even know if people even do hex crawls anymore because of the way that the game has changed. But in earlier editions, this is basically what a hex crawl is. The balance between the forces is something best determined by experience. However, troops armed with missile weapons are generally much more powerful than light troops that lack such weapons. Armored men are usually better than troops without protection, although they move more slowly. Trained pikemen are more than a match for any but an army that's either equally armed fighters or numerous missile troops. A table of point values appears in these rules, and you will find it helpful in selecting balanced forces. So each unit has like a point, a certain amount of points, and then you're given say you have 2,000 points to spend, and then pikemen is 20 points, so you can have 100 pikemen. Table of points of values appears in these rules, and you will find it helpful in selecting balanced forces. Playing ability and terrain must also be taken into consideration, however. If, for example, the better player is to receive a 300-point army, it might be wise to allow his opponent to select 50 additional points worth of troops in order to balance the game. This is actually a lot like Go, where in Go, people's skills against each other are measured in how many extra moves the good player has to give to the bad player for it to be an even match. So this is actually a ancient, tried and true method of balancing out games between uneven skill sets. Similarly, if one player decides the kind of terrain the battlefield is to be composed of, or the historic terrain favors one side, the side with such a terrain advantage to probably have a considerably weaker army. As the men are scaled down in size, so is the field of combat. Therefore, a move of a few inches on the tabletop will represent a march of 10 times as many yards for our small campaigners. Now, this right here is where inches come from in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. From what I've read of Chainmail, the inches system in this game makes way more sense than it does in AD&D, because in AD&D he basically just takes this scale, 1 inch equals 10 yards, and just copy pastes it without thinking about like how the game actually works. Or maybe it's because it's a legacy rule and it just makes sense to the players at the time. But I mean, we'll get there. But in this game, an inch actually means something in terms of the playing field. Well, an inch literally is 10 yards. So, it actually makes sense in this game, whereas it doesn't really make sense in AD&D. But we'll get there eventually. They move and fight in miniature. The players order their formations about just as medieval military commanders did, and much more efficiently in all likelihood, for a number of rather obvious reasons. But the proof of the opponent's ability only comes in combat situations. Here, each figure will do only as well as its known capabilities foretell, with allowances for chance factors which affect every battle, such as dice throwing in miniature warfare. The different kind of troops fight in relation to... Well, I should go... It's pretty cool that he was already thinking about using dice, and this is where the idea of using dice to simulate randomness in combat came from. And of course, it's how the game still works today. Well, this was made in like 76. This was 72. So that would be almost 50 years ago. Crazy. The different types of troops fight in relation to each other kind. Given normal probabilities, a body of horsemen will always defeat a like number of footmen, excluding pike-armed troops, but a small chance that the footmen will somehow triumph remain, and that chance is reflected in the combat tables employed. So, some units are stronger than other units, but sometimes because of the way the dice may fall, sometimes the footman or the weaker unit will win. Note that should the infantry manage to surprise the horsemen by attacking from the rear or flank, they have a much improved chance of winning the combat or melee. Thus, while movement is scaled to size, and a time period during which scaled movement takes place, combat is based on the historically known capabilities of each particular kind of fighting man. There's fighting man, which is where fighters came from, and then expresses a dice rolling probability in relation to like and differing types of soldiers. Note that should the infantry manage... Thus, while movement is scaled to size, combat is based on the historically known capabilities of each particular kind of fighting man and express the dice rolling probability in relation. So basically saying that, like, historical capabilities are used as a background for how the dice rolls work. Close simulation of actual combat is thereby attained. While a pawn can always take a knight in the chess game, a similar situation will seldom occur in miniature warfare. But the knight, cavalry, just might fail to take the pawn when the battle is fought in miniature. In addition, the mental and physical condition of the men, their morale, is taken into consideration in this game. I like that this game has morale, because it makes it a little bit more realistic and interesting than playing chess, or in RTS. Because if you're playing chess or in RTS, then when you tell your units to move, they always move. Doesn't matter if they're at 1 HP or max HP and max upgrades, they always move to the same spot, In StarCraft, click, click, Marine's gonna walk into his death. But in this game, it actually factors in morale, which is pretty cool. Because then if like half the soldiers in a unit die, then the rest are going to flee and try and get off the board and leave the combat, so that's pretty cool. And of course, it's easy to see where that kind of role-playing had kind of built up to role-playing games. Morale is checked before and after combat, basing the determination on historical precedent, just as the fighting ability in actual cases was drawn upon to calculate melee results. A loss of heart is at least as serious as a defeat in combat, and perhaps more so, for most battles are won without the necessity of decimation of the losing side. So you don't have to actually go to combat and kill all 100% of every single unit, of every single man in a unit. I don't know the historical military terms, so I'm sorry about that. But you can kill 50% and then the other 50% will run away. So that's pretty cool. It actually kind of gives the winner an advantage, but I guess that's how real combat works. You know, if you're one guy versus 100, you're just going to run away. You're not going to fight. Finally, how is it determined when the battle is over and one side awarded the laurels of victory? As with all facets of miniature wargaming, it is up to the parties concerned. The game can continue until one side is reduced below a certain percentage of its original strength, 25%, 50%, 75%, or whatever. Gary really likes saying or whatever. He does that a lot. The battle can be continued until one opponent has driven his enemy completely off the battlefield, or the players can assign set values to certain terrain features and troop types, keeping count of gains and losses for a set number of turns, the winner being the side with the greatest number of accumulated points. So if you have all your units, so you say, okay, we're going to play for 50 turns, and for most of the 50 turns, if your units had the high ground, and your opponent was lost in the forest, then you would win, which is interesting. I don't know if I would do it like that. I would probably want it to be a definitive win, because let's say, because who's to say that the point system is entirely accurate to who would have actually won in a battle? Because let's say, yeah, you spent most of the time on with higher ground, but then right before the game ended, you got flanked. And it's like, well, I had the high ground for the 30 turns. And it's like, well, no, I still wouldn't have won. I just flanked you. You know, if we actually played this out as a real battle, I would have won. So I don't know if I like the point system, but you know, it's another option. This is the way that I like to think about D&D and RPGs. This game too, by extension. It's better to have more rules. Okay, I kind of take that back. My thought here was, it's better to have more rules because you can just throw away the rules you don't want. But the problem with having too many rules is that it's really hard to organize. And again, this is something we'll get to when we get to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. AD&D First Edition has so many rules in so many different places that to actually understand what the hell is happening is impossible. Like, trying to learn D&D through the AD&D books is impossible. So that's the problem of having too many rules. But having too few rules, and you'll have people complain and like, well, that's not how it should work. It should work like this, and get debates and with the players and the DM. And personally, I think especially recently, I've fallen on the side of less rules. But maybe there should be an RPG that's like, here's the core rules. It's like 50 pages long, and here's 200 pages of just random ideas, campaign settings, stuff that you can pick and choose and apply to those 50 pages of basic rules. I think that that's a much better system. Because when you start weaving ideas and rules together, it starts to feel either restrictive or confusing. So, that's my thought about that. With no other form of wargaming, or nearly any form of game for that matter, is the player given the scope of choice and range for imagination that miniature wargaming provides. You have carte blanche to create and recreate fictional and historical battles. The following rules will, as closely as possible, simulate what would have happened if the battle had just been fought in reality. I think that's pretty cool. You have to think about back in the 70s, no computers, no GTA, no Shin Megami Tensei. You didn't even have like Ultima, and I really don't know what the board gaming scene was like back then, but I know that there's some cool games because Zeroth Edition references this game called Avalon Hill survival something, outdoor survival, which has like a big board. And so board gaming was kind of like the gaming back then. It's really hard for me to. I was born in 1997, so it's hard for me to put myself back in the 70s. But like they didn't have computers, so miniature wargaming, with all its complexity, was probably one of the best ways to use your imagination and play a game. So it makes sense that from wargaming would spring D&D, which is a game all about imagination, all about possibilities. It's like, if you think about it, it's like a branching path where you have board gaming leads to a fork in the road where it goes one side, which is role-playing games, and the other side, which is computers. You have computer games, which is all strict rules and planning out exactly what you can do every single step of the way because it has to, because it's a game, versus RPGs, versus Dungeons & Dragons, where there's no set rules, there's barely any rules, you can kind of do whatever you want, it's all in your imagination. So it's interesting to see board games lead up to that split, and then you get computer games on one side and D&D on the other side, and the split's still going to today. People still have the same debates, where they're like, well, that part of D&D feels too video gamey, So it's interesting that it's not really interesting that Gary would realize this because, he was playing the game, and he was like, well, this is just a great game. So, another image. What is that? Is that like a medieval gun or handheld cannon? That's pretty cool. A longbow. The Middle Ages is probably one of the best known but least understood periods of history. We do not pretend that these wargame rules will add significantly to anyone's knowledge, albeit they do reflect medieval warfare reasonably well, but they have a secondary purpose. Besides providing you with an exciting and enjoyable battle game, we hope that these rules will interest the wargamer sufficiently to start him on the pursuit of the history of the Middle Ages. Such study will at least enrich the life of the new historian. Perhaps it will even contribute to the study of history itself. I find that interesting because when you get to D&D, of course, D&D led to the Satanic Panic. People were saying it was a bad influence on children. Whereas Chainmail, where it came from, was probably actually a really good influence on children because it made them interested in history, which they point out here. So that's pretty interesting. The LGTSA, that's the Lake Geneva Tactical Strategic something. I almost got there. This is like the basis for Chainmail. The LGTSA medieval miniatures rules were developed primarily for use with Elastolan and Starlux figures. I've never heard of them, but this was 50 years ago. Which are 40mm scale. However, they may be used equally well with any scale, including the inexpensive Airfix Robin Hood and Sheriff of Nottingham 25mm plastic figures. Although the rules have been thoroughly play-tested over a period of many months, it is likely that you will eventually find some part that seems ambiguous, unanswered, or unsatisfactory. When such a situation arises, settle it amongst yourselves, record the decision in the rule book, and abide by it from then on. These rules may be treated as guidelines around which you form a game that suits you. It's always a good idea to amend the rules to allow for historical precedence or common sense. Follow the spirit of the rules rather than the letter. And that's really interesting too, because that's like the entire idea of D&D was just captured in this one little bit. Where it's like, and really this is just good advice even today. Like, let's say, this is an example that I saw of someone comparing old school and OSR versus new D&D. But I still think it's a good example for this case too. If someone jumps off a ledge and says, I'm going to jump off the ledge and plunge my dagger into his back, then as the GM, who cares if there's not a rule for jumping and plunging with a dagger? Don't give him basic damage. You know, he should do double damage because he's plunging a dude the dagger from like 15 feet up. You know, I don't know. Or like even better, like a I have a two-handed sword and I'm gonna jump and impale this guy with a two-handed sword after a 15-foot fall. Like, of course you're gonna give him like triple damage. Like, that's insane. So, you know, I think this is just good advice even today for anyone who plays any RPG. It's like, well, and he understood this back then too. Like, well, if historically this makes more sense and this makes more sense. If in reality this makes more sense, this makes more sense. You know, so spirit of the rules rather than the letter. That's really cool. The ratio of figures to men assumed is 1 to 20. The ground scale is 1 inch equals 10 yards, and 1 turn of play is roughly equivalent to 1 minute of time in battle. The troop ratio will hold true for 30mm figures, but if a smaller scale is used, it should be reduced to 1 to 10. So, 1 miniature is 20 miniatures. There's also rules later on for doing it with 1 miniature equals 1 person instead of 1 miniature equals 20 people. I think I said 20 miniatures. Turn sequence. Now this is something that I think that like every single D&D RPG ever should just take note of. Eventually this was made for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and it was called Addict by a guy named DM Prada. But if AD&D just had like this exact thing, if Gary Gygax just realized how useful this is in every single one of the things that he made, it would have saved everyone so much time. Because this is just so useful. It's like, it's literally a flowchart. 1, 1, 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Step 1, step 2, step 3. There's nothing like that for D&D. And while I get that in D&D, again, you don't really want to confine the game down to a strict system. You know, some confining down to a turn sequence makes sense. Especially when, if the rule system actually has a turn sequence built in, it should just be shown to the players. Like, you roll for initiative, or you roll for surprise, you do the surprise turn, you roll for initiative, you play out each side. You know, like, if there really is steps, you should just list the steps like this, because it's so much easier to understand. Let me check to see if I'm actually recording. Yes, I am actually recording. That's good. Or else I would have just been sitting here for 30 minutes talking to nobody. The move, counter move system. Step 1. Both opponents roll a die. The side with the higher score has the choice of electing to move first or last. Step 2. The side that has the first move moves its figures and makes any split moves and missile fire. I had to look this up. Split move is like, I'm going to move halfway, do an action, and then move the rest of my distance. Taking a pass-through fire possible at the same time, which is like, this is kind of after my time, but from what I understand, this is like a attack of opportunity in like 3rd edition onwards in D&D. The side that has last move now moves its figures and makes any split moves and missile fire, taking any pass-through fire possible at the same time. Then you have artillery fire, then you have missile fire, then you have melee. And then step 1 through 6 is repeated. So, really, when you're just looking at this, it's not that difficult of a game. I know I made the comparison to real-time strategy, but really the way the rules work is like a turn-based strategy game. It's like, well, you move. Well, how does attacking work? So, you always attack at step 4, 5, and 6 unless you do a split move, in which case you attack first. So if you move halfway and then attack and then move the other halfway, then it goes on in step 2 or 3. And if you don't, then at the end of your turn when you end up, then you can attack. Oh, it says right here. Duh. Missile fire from split moving troops is considered to take effect immediately during the movement portion of the turn, and the same is true of pass-through fire. All other fire, both artillery and missiles, considered to simultaneously take effect just prior to melee resolution. Simultaneous battle system. Oh, so there's multiple ways to do it. That makes sense. Both sides write orders for each of the units, including direction of movement and facing. Both sides move their units according to their written orders, making one half of the move, checking for unordered melee contact due to opponent movement, conducting split moves in missile fire, and taking any pass-through fire. Then the balance of movement is completed as ordered. Artillery fire is taken, missile fire is taken, melee as a result. Exact orders for each unit, group of fighting figures of like type, must be given. Cavalry may be given the order to charge if charged, either in their own behalf or in support of any nearby friendly units. Such charge if charged movement begins at the one half move and is only half of a normal charge. So a unit of medium horse CIC to support a unit of archers would move up to 12 feet during the second half of the turn. So at the halfway point, so let's say you have artillery and you say, okay, I'm going to write down on the page, okay, they're going to charge if charged. So the opponent chooses a charge. So halfway through their movement, when everything stops, at one half of the movement, everything stops, then these units, which you said will charge if charged, will charge for the second half towards them. That makes sense. So far it's pretty simple, but it does get a little bit more complex when you get into, like, how does artillery work, Morale checks are not indicated in either of the two systems of movement, as morale checks can occur during the fire and or melee portions of any given turn, just depending on the circumstances. However, morale checks must be made during whatever segment of the turn the rules require. I don't really know what this means. Must be made during whatever segment of the turn the rules require. So I think this is what it's saying, is that sometimes there will be circumstances where you want to make a morale check, but that shouldn't take away from the other times when you should make a morale check. So there's certain times when you always make a morale check, which I guess from what I said earlier is the beginning and the end of a turn. But sometimes if something extraordinary happens, you want to make a morale check in the middle of the turn, too. Makes sense. Type of terrain. Terrain effects upon movement. Type of terrain and effect. You have a hill. Slows movement 50%. Prevents all charge moves, but movement downhill is at normal speed. As hill. Wooded is as hill with the additional penalty of preventing the movement of formed bodies of troops. Marshy is as hill with the additional penalty preventing the entrance of heavy equipment, catapults, and guns. So that's interesting. So you have environments where you can't move catapults, and you have environments where your perfect phalanx is going to break apart. Rough prevents all charge moves. Ditch and ramparts are like hills. Rivers and streams. Treat individually as to fordability, penalty for crossing, and so on. A typical stream would require 6 inches to cross, prevents charge moves, while a typical river would require troops to halt before and after crossing and cost an entire move to cross. That makes sense. So I think this is like 1/4 of movement. I think normal movement's like 24 inches. Hang on. Terrain selection. Often it becomes difficult to devise new terrain for a battle, and we have found the following system to be useful. On a number of 3-inch by 5-inch index cards, draw the following: 2 with rivers, 1 with a marsh, 1 with a pond, 1 with a gully, 2 with the woods, 1 with the rough ground, 4 with various shaped hills, and 8 blanks. Each opponent draws up to 4 times. The weaker defending side draws first. Terrain is placed anywhere on the table with the drawing player's option. So this is basically a way of randomly generating an environment, and it's pretty cool that back when Chainmail was made, they didn't have polyhedral dice, really. That's why when you get to like Holmes Basic, I forget what color the box is, but when you get to the first of the basic D&D system, they actually bought their dice from a children's like educational tool supply company called Creative Publications. That's why you get those funky, really soft plastic dice that like fall apart, that are always the same color. That's why they came from a school supply company. So anyway, the point was that what I've heard is that Gary Gygax started using dice because he wanted ways to generate randomness in different types of random distributions. Because if you roll 2d6, two six-sided dice, you don't actually get 2 through 12 evenly. You get a bell curve. So 2 and 12 are the least common, and 7, 6, 7, 8 are the most common. So you get like 6, 7, 8, like something like 5 times more often than 2 or 12 in terms of probability. So it's cool that he realized back then that if you use cards, then you always get an equal probability. So without even needing to use dice, you can get random generation just from using index cards. And you don't have to make index cards for all kinds of different situations, because this is really the only situation you need them for. They're just for the specific situation. So the player who's at a disadvantage, like the less experienced player or the player with less points, or they get to draw first and they get to put their piece in the map wherever they want. So that's pretty cool. Okay, here's the movement. And when you get to D&D, it's pretty much the exact same movement charts. You have, it caps off at 12 inches, exactly like D&D, going down to 9, then 6, exactly like D&D. I think even horses are 24. So literally the exact same charts from Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as these. Now, I don't even know if they're really scaled properly, because a turn in D&D, actually no, they are actually the same amount of time. A turn in D&D is actually the same as a turn in Chainmail. So yeah, they do. You can just copy paste them and they work. That's pretty cool. I'm not gonna read through the chart because that seems pretty boring. And here's the missile range too. So throwing axes and spears only go, that'd be 30 yards. It's actually pretty far for throwing an axe. 30 yards. It's pretty insane. And then, of course, there's a whole section about catapults and cannons. Formation and facing. Units must pay a movement penalty in order to change their formation and or facing. So if you've got a column, which is like a line going forward where it's like face to back, and you want to change it to a line, which is side to side, that takes one whole move. You want to go from a side to side line to a column, that's also one move. You want to go from a column to a square, which is, if you think about it, you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, and then 3 goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9, 10 is in the middle. And then you get a square with a little dot at the bottom. I don't know if I explained that properly. Maybe I should break out paint. I don't really feel like it. Oh, whatever. Paint. Thank you. So if you have... I want a bigger pencil than that. So you have 10 people. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Then if you want to make a square, then this guy would come right here. This guy would come right here. This guy would stay where he is. This guy would stay where he is. This guy would come right here. This guy would come right here. This guy would stay where he is. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8, 9, 10. This guy would stay where he is. This guy would come here. This guy would come here. And this guy would move to the middle. And so what you get is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you can move from a column to a square. I'll just leave pane open. And if you want to go from a line to a square, that takes 2 moves. To me, this kind of makes sense. I don't know. I don't know the actual military reasons for why this would take 2 moves, but units. Now, what I don't know is whether or not this means formation of your actual miniatures on the board. That's what it has to mean, right? Versus formation within each miniature, because a miniature is 10 or 20 people, right? So it doesn't mean like the miniature itself changes formation. There's no rules for that, so that can't be what it means. It has to mean that you actually move the miniatures themselves into column formation, line formation, square formation. So, and then if you want to change the way that your units are facing, depending on how much you turn, it costs a certain amount of your movement. So I find that if you're really to play this, some things you definitely need. Of course, you need a ruler. You definitely need a ruler to measure out distance and ranges and everything else. You also want a protractor. Protractor would be really useful, because then you can measure exact angles. Probably a circular protractor would actually be optimal, or just 2 protractors taped together, because then you can get the whole 360 degrees of movement. So if you put if you had a unit on the board, put a protractor on top of him. If he's within 45 degrees to the left or right, that'd be a 1/4 of a move. I can draw this. So if you have a unit sitting right here, you put a protractor on top. Protractor looks like this. This is 45 degrees to the left. If this is 0, 45, 90, 135, 180. So this is 45. We can just say these are each increments of 45 degrees. So if it's within this area right here, this would be 1/4 of a move. If it's in the area from here to here, imagine there's another protractor here, so this is another 45 degrees. And there's 45 degrees. And then there's 45 degrees. So if it's within this range or this range, then it's a 1/2 a move. And if it's within this range right here, then it's a full move to turn around. So a protractor would be really useful. Fatigue. Continued activity brings on weariness. Moving 5 consecutive turns, moving 2 consecutive turns charging then meleeing, moving 1 turn charging then meleeing 2 rounds, meleeing 3 rounds. When any troops fulfill one of the above, they become fatigued. They attack at the next lower value, heavy foot equals light foot. They defend at the next lower value, and morale value drops -1 on values and die rolls. So when you make a morale roll, you get -1 on the roll. Movement uphill equals 2 normal moves per uphill move. Swiss Landsknecht. Swiss Landsknecht. Double above numbers for fatigue. 1 turn of non-movement fully restores fatigued troops. I don't know the historical reason for this, but Gary seems like entirely fascinated by the Swiss army in the Middle Ages. I really don't know why. They probably were some kind of super elite troops at the time. So that's just my ignorance. So 1 turn of non-movement fully restores fatigued troops. So this seems pretty complicated, but if you just leave your certain units alone for a second, then for 1 turn, then they'll go back to being normal. I really don't know how you keep a track of this, though. Maybe you'd have, like, fatigue cards. It seems really easy to make 5 consecutive turns and forget. And be like, was that 4 or 6? You know? So that seems a little difficult. Especially when it's like there's all these different options. It's like move 5 consecutive turns, and it's like 2 consecutive turns and charge. Wait, did I break there for a turn, or did he just move? I think he just moved. Yeah, this seems a little confusing, in my opinion. But when you have a system like this where it tries to be really detailed, then of course there's going to be complexity. I think that's kind of the conceit of this game. Is if you want to have a game that realistically simulates warfare, of course, the more realistic you get, the more complexity you add to it, right? Missile fire. Number firing. So I think what this is saying is, let's say you have 5 to 6 troops firing, and you're against unarmored troops. If you roll a 1 or a 2 on a d6, then with 5 to 6 troops, you kill 2. If you roll a 3 to 6, you kill 3. Right? So if you have 9 to 10 guys and you roll 3 to 6, you kill 5 unarmored troops. And then the dice go up and the numbers change for different armor. So you have... Oh, they just simplified the ranges so they can go up higher. That makes sense. Whereas in this case, if you wanted to get to 20, you just multiply this by 2. That makes sense to me. So, let's say you have 20 archers, and you roll a 6, you kill 3 fully armored units. That makes sense. Groups of missile troops which are larger than the maximum shown on the above table must be into 2 or more equal groups so as not to exceed the maximum. Groups not exceeding the maximum which are firing at the same target may not be divided into smaller troops. So if you have more... Oh, so you don't multiply. I mean, effectively you multiply, but like... If you have 20 troops and you're firing against... Well, I don't really get that because here it goes up to 20, but here it goes up to 10. So I guess if you're firing on... I guess it's just you're separating them into groups just for the die roll. So if you have 20 firing on fully armored, it doesn't matter, you just roll 1 die. But if you have 20 firing on unarmored or 1/2 armor and shield, you arbitrarily split them in half. Theoretically in the middle. So if you had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20 units, you just split them down the middle. Or like this. But this probably is easier. And then you say, okay, here they roll a 6, here they roll 5. And they're against unarmored. So both of those kill 5 and 5. That makes sense. Rate of fire. Crossbowmen, archers, and longbowmen may fire every turn. If archers or longbowmen do not move and are not meleeed at the end of a turn, they may fire twice. That's pretty cool. They can fire twice. If crossbowmen, archers, and longbowmen are moved up to one half of their normal movement, they may fire once, excluding charging. If they're moved over one half of their normal movement, they may fire once only if they beat their opponent's die roll. So if you move over one half of your normal movement, then you and your opponent have to roll a d6, and if you win, then you get to attack. Heavy crossbowmen fire every other turn. They may move up to one half of their normal movement and still reload or fire, but if they are moved over one half of their movement, excluding charging, they must beat their opponent's die roll to fire, and no reloading is allowed. I don't really know why you would charge with crossbowmen, archers, and longbowmen. I guess just to move them from point A to point B faster. Makes sense. Yeah, and you have to beat your opponent's die roll to fire, no reloading is allowed. They have 1 to missile fire die rolls. So add 1 to the die roll. So heavy crossbowmen just in general, add 1 to the die roll. So it should say missile fire excluding gunpowder catapults. And there should be like a note here that says crossbowmen add 1 to their die roll. But whatever. Split move and fire. Horsemen armed with bows are permitted to perform this type of movement. To accomplish a split move and fire, the horse archers move up to one half of their normal movement, immediately conduct missile fire procedure, continue to move out to balance out their normal movement, not to exceed one half of the normal movement. So this is where they explain what split move is. The horse archers may be fired upon by opponent missile troops during their firing phase. This type of movement. So only horsemen with bows can split move. To accomplish a split move and fire, they move up to one half, fire immediately, continue to move. Now, and opponent missile troops can fire against them. And it doesn't say here, but another thing that could happen is that they could trigger an attack of opportunity, a pass-through attack, but it doesn't say that because that's a separate rule. But, oh yeah, it's right here. I guess it's good formatting when I try to explain something and then I look and it's right underneath it. Pass-through fire. Stationary missile troops may elect to give pass-through fire to any enemy units which are within their missile range at the half-moved portion of the turn. This will include any enemy troops moving, passing by, or charging the missile troops. And here's another point where you didn't want a protractor, where the arc of fire is 45 degrees left or right. Horsemen 180 degrees left, 145 degrees right. So I'm riding a horse. I'm holding my bow. Oh, you're right. This is actually kind of fun to do. Just if you're sitting in your desk chair, put one hand out in front of you. You put your left hand out in front of you, and your right hand back up near your shoulder, like you're pulling back a bow. And then try and turn to the left. You can get all the way behind yourself. You try and turn to the right. You get like 45 degrees is pretty generous. Yeah, it's about 45 degrees to the right before, like, your right hand gets all crunched up with your shoulder, and then you can't go any further. So that's actually really interesting. That's insightful. I would have never thought of that. That's something that I'm gonna steal and think about for D&D. Cool. Number of ranks permitted to fire. 2 ranks of missile troops are permitted to fire, providing the first rank of missile troops. Additional ranks of missile troops on significantly higher ground are permitted to fire as if they compose a second rank. Note that missile range is measured from the first rank. Oh, so if you're in the second rank, so you only have to measure from the front rank. And you don't have to measure twice for the second rank, they just automatically assume the front rank's range. Makes sense. Indirect fire. Archers and longbowmen, but not crossbowmen of any type, may fire over the heads of intervening troops, friendly or enemy, providing they are more than 3 feet distant. Indirect fire reduces the range of the weapon firing by 1/3. Indirect fire automatically classifies the target in the next higher armor class. Unarmored targets become equal to 1/2 armor or shield, and fully armored targets become arrow-proof. That's pretty interesting too, the 1/2 armor or shield, which is exactly how AD&D does their armor class, where it's like, you have better armor if you have better armor class if you have this armor on, or you have a shield. If you have both, then you get both, So this is if you want to shoot an arrow up, so it goes over one target and then hits another target. And then the solution to make this more fair is that you roll in the next higher armor category if you want to do indirect fire. So if you're unarmored, you move to here, and if you're here, you move to fully armored, as it says. If you're fully armored, you become arrow-proof. So a fully armored target can't be hit by an indirect fire. Cool. I'm going to take a break, get something to eat. It's 10:43, I just woke up, honestly. And then I'll come back and we'll do more. Part 2.